It was a crisp Tuesday morning, the kind where the air feels fresh and full of promise. The streets were alive with people rushing to work, kids heading to school, and cars honking in the background. Among them was a young boy, no older than 10, walking alongside his mom as they entered one of the busiest banks downtown. The glass doors swung open automatically, welcoming them into the warm interior filled with the soft hum of chatter and the rhythmic clicking of keyboards. The boys. Mom had been called in for an urgent meeting that morning. She wasn't just any customer at this bank. She owned it. But the boy didn't know that yet. All he knew was that his mom worked hard, always dressed smartly, and seemed to command respect wherever she went. To him, she was simply Mom, the strongest, most capable person he'd ever known. As they stepped inside, the boy looked around curiously. The bank was bustling with activity. People stood in lines, some tapping their feet impatiently while others chatted quietly on their phones. Behind the counters, tellers sat neatly dressed in uniforms, counting money, typing on computers, and assisting customers. It felt like a world of its own, busy but orderly. His mom glanced down at him and smiled warmly. "Stay close, okay? I'll be right back," she said before excusing herself to take an important phone call outside. Left alone by the counter, the boy watched as his mom walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the tiled floor. For a moment he felt a little unsure, standing there without her, but then curiosity took over. He wandered closer to the teller window, peering up at the woman behind the counter. She looked young, probably in her mid-20s, with blonde hair tied neatly in a bun. She was focused on counting stacks of cash, her fingers moving swiftly across the bills. Gathering his courage, the boy leaned forward slightly and spoke up. "My mom owns this place," he said confidently, his voice clear despite the noise around him. The teller paused what she was doing and looked up, her eyebrows raised in surprise. A smirk slowly spread across her face. "Oh yeah?" she replied, barely holding back a laugh. "Sure thing, kid. And I'm the Queen of England." Her tone was light, almost playful, but there was an edge to it, a hint of mockery that made the boy's cheeks flush. He straightened up, feeling a mix of embarrassment and determination. "No, really," he insisted, his voice firmer now. "She does." But the teller only rolled her eyes and turned back to her work, dismissing him entirely. "Right, buddy. Whatever you say." The boy stood there, frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do next. He could feel the weight of other people's stares. He noticed a few customers nearby chuckling under their breaths, clearly amused by the exchange. Some thought it was cute, imagining the boy's wild imagination running wild. Others gave him pitying looks, assuming he was trying too hard to impress. Despite the laughter and the dismissive attitude, the boy refused to back down. Deep inside, he knew the truth. His mom did own this bank, maybe not the whole building, maybe not every single branch, but she was definitely the boss here. He clung to that knowledge like a lifeline, even as the teller continued to ignore him. Outside, the boy's mom finished her phone call and glanced through the glass doors of the bank. She saw her son standing awkwardly by the counter, shifting, his weight from one foot to the other. Something about the scene made her pause. From where she stood, she couldn't hear the conversation, but she could sense something was off. Her instincts kicked in, and she decided to head back inside to check on him. Meanwhile, the boy tried once more to get the teller's attention. "You'll see," he muttered under his breath. "She's coming back soon." But the teller wasn't interested. She kept her focus on her tasks, occasionally glancing up with an amused expression that only fueled the boy's frustration. By the time his mom stepped back inside, the tension in the air was palpable. She approached the counter, her presence commanding immediate attention. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the scene before landing on the teller. With a calm but firm voice, she asked, "Is there a problem here?" Everyone froze. The teller's smile faltered, and the boy finally exhaled, relief washing over him. What happened next would change everything, for the boy, for the teller, and for everyone watching. The boy's mom stood there, her presence instantly shifting the energy in the room. She wasn't loud or aggressive, just calm and composed, but there was something about the way she carried herself that made everyone take notice. Her eyes scanned the area briefly before landing on the teller, who suddenly looked nervous. The woman behind the counter froze mid-motion, her hands hovering over the stack of cash she'd been counting. "No, ma'am," the teller stammered quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "No problem at all, just chatting with your son." She glanced down at the boy, then back up at his mom, trying to sound casual. "He's quite the storyteller. Says you own the bank." The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with implication. For a split second, no one said anything. Then, without missing a beat, the boy's mom stepped closer to the counter, placing one hand gently on her son's shoulder. Her expression remained calm, but there was a sharpness in her gaze as she locked eyes with the teller. "That's because I do," she said matter-of-factly, her voice steady and clear. "I'm Angela Johnson, owner of this branch. Nice to meet you." The room seemed to freeze. The teller's face went pale, her forced smile crumbling into an awkward grimace. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. Her confident demeanor vanished, replaced by sheer panic. Her mouth opened and closed a few times like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, she managed to choke out, "Oh, I didn't realize." "You didn't ask," the boy's mom replied simply, cutting through the tension. Her tone wasn't angry, but it carried a weight that made the teller shrink back slightly. The boy watched silently, feeling a mix of emotions swirling inside him. Relief washed over him first. He'd known all along that his mom was telling the truth. But there was also a flicker of pride, seeing her stand so confidently in front of everyone. He felt her hand tighten ever so slightly on his shoulder, a silent reassurance that everything was okay. By now, other customers waiting in line had noticed the exchange. Some craned their necks to get a better view, while others whispered among themselves. A few exchanged knowing glances, realizing they'd underestimated the situation earlier. Even the other employees behind the counter stopped what they were doing, their attention fully on the unfolding drama. The manager of the bank, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, appeared almost out of nowhere. He must have sensed the commotion from his office because he rushed over, looking flustered. "Ms. Johnson," he exclaimed, bowing his head slightly in respect. "Please accept our sincerest apologies. This kind of behavior is unacceptable, and we will address it immediately." Angela nodded curtly, though her expression remained unreadable. She turned her attention back to her son, kneeling down slightly so they were eye to eye. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. Her voice was gentle now, full of concern. The boy nodded, still holding onto her arm tightly. Though he hadn't cried, the weight of the encounter lingered in his wide, solemn eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "But why did she laugh at me? Why didn't she believe me?" Angela sighed, straightening up again. She glanced at the teller, who was now staring at the floor, avoiding eye contact. Then she looked back at her son, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes people make assumptions based on what they expect to see, not what's actually true," she explained. "It's wrong, but it happens. What matters is how we respond to those moments. You handled yourself well today, sweetheart. Don't ever forget that." Her words seemed to sink in, and the boy nodded slowly, processing what she'd said. He still felt hurt, but hearing her praise gave him a small sense of victory. He hadn't backed down, even when the teller laughed at him. That counted for something. Meanwhile, the manager continued to apologize profusely, promising that the teller would be spoken to and that steps would be taken to ensure such behavior wouldn't happen again. Angela listened patiently, nodding occasionally, but her focus remained on her son. She could tell he was still processing everything, and she wanted to make sure he felt supported. After a few more minutes, Angela decided it was time to leave. She thanked the manager for his apology, though her tone suggested the matter wasn't entirely resolved. As she walked away, leading her son toward the exit, the entire bank seemed to exhale collectively. Conversations resumed, albeit quieter than before, and the employees returned to their tasks. though the atmosphere felt different now, charged with unease. Outside, the crisp morning air hit them as they stepped onto the sidewalk. The boy looked up at his mom, his brow furrowed. "Do you think she'll get fired?" he asked hesitantly. Angela paused, considering the question. She knelt down again, meeting his gaze. "Probably not," she admitted. "But she'll have to learn from this experience, just like we all do. Sometimes mistakes teach us more than punishments ever could." The boy nodded thoughtfully, letting her words sink in. Though the incident had shaken him, he realized something important. It wasn't about proving the teller wrong. It was about standing up for himself and knowing the truth, no matter what anyone else thought. As they walked away, Angela slipped her arm around her son's shoulders, pulling him close. "You did good today," she said softly, kissing the top of his head. "Let's go home." And with that, they disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind a bank full of people who would remember this moment for a long time. Later that afternoon, the boy and his mom sat together at the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. A pot of tea rested between them, steam curling lazily into the air. His mom poured herself a cup, then slid another one toward him, even though he usually preferred juice or hot chocolate. Today felt different, though. He wasn't sure why, but it seemed like tea was exactly what they both needed. His mom leaned back in her chair, watching him closely. Her expression was calm, but there was a softness in her eyes that made him feel safe. "How are you feeling?" she asked, gently, breaking the silence. Her voice was warm, inviting him to open up without any pressure. The boy shrugged, staring down at his teacup. He traced the rim with his finger, thinking about everything that had happened earlier at the bank. "I guess I'm okay," he said finally, glancing up at her. But why did she laugh at me? Why didn't she believe me? His mom sighed, setting her cup down on the table. She reached across and placed a hand over his, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Sometimes people make assumptions based on what they expect to see," she explained slowly, choosing her words carefully. "They see someone young, like you, and they don't think you could possibly know something important. Or maybe they assume because of how someone looks or talks they aren't telling the truth." The boy frowned, trying to understand. "But isn't that wrong?" "It is," she agreed, nodding firmly. "It's unfair, and it happens more often than it should. People let their biases get in the way instead of listening or asking questions. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong, though. You stood your ground, and that's something to be proud of." He thought about that for a moment, letting her words sink in. Standing his ground. That's what he'd done. Even when the teller laughed at him, even when other people in the bank chuckled or gave him pitying looks, he hadn't backed down. He'd known the truth, and he'd stuck to it. For the first time since leaving the bank, he felt a small spark of pride flicker inside him, but he hesitated, looking up at her again. "Do you think she'll get fired?" His mom tilted her head slightly, considering the question. "Probably not," she admitted after a pause. "Firing someone might seem like an easy solution, but it doesn't always fix the bigger problem. What matters is whether she learns from this experience. If she takes the time to reflect on what happened and tries to do better next time, then maybe something good can come out of it." The boy nodded. Slowly, though, he still looked unsure. "What if she doesn't learn? What if she does the same thing to someone else?" His mom smiled faintly, leaning forward slightly. "That's a fair concern," she said. "And honestly, we can't control how other people act. But what we can do is set an example. When someone treats us unfairly, we have a choice. We can respond with anger, or we can respond with grace. We can show them a better way to handle things, even if it's hard." Her words lingered in the air, simple yet powerful. The boy thought about the teller, the way her face had turned pale when his mom introduced herself, the awkward apologies that followed. Maybe she really had been embarrassed. Maybe she hadn't meant to hurt anyone's feelings. Either way, it wasn't his job to decide her fate. All he could do was focus on how he handled himself, and he'd done that well. His mom must have noticed the change in his expression because she smiled warmly. "You know, she added. This might end up being a defining moment for you, not just today, but years from now. It's easy to let moments like these slip away, but if you hold on to the lessons, they can shape who you become. What kind of lesson? He asked curiously. She thought for a moment before answering. Resilience, she said simply. Knowing who you are and standing by it, even when others doubt you. Humility. Understanding that everyone makes mistakes, including you. And empathy. Recognizing that sometimes people act out of ignorance rather than malice. Those are qualities that will serve you well no matter where life takes you. The boy listened intently, absorbing every word. He didn't fully grasp everything she was saying, but he understood enough to feel a sense of clarity. This wasn't just about the bank or the teller. It was about learning how to navigate the world with confidence and kindness. As the conversation wound down, his mom stood up and began clearing the cups from the table. You hungry? She asked casually, glancing over her shoulder. I can make us something quick. Yeah, he replied, smiling for the first time all day. Can we have pancakes? She laughed softly, shaking her head. Pancakes for dinner? Sure, why not? Let's make it a celebration, you earned it. While she bustled around the kitchen, pulling out ingredients and humming a tune under her breath, the boy sat quietly at the table, lost in thought. The events of the day replayed in his mind, but this time, they didn't sting as much. Instead, they felt like pieces of a puzzle falling into place, helping him understand a little more about the world and about himself. By the time the pancakes were ready, golden brown and stacked high on a plate, the tension he'd been carrying all day had melted away. Sitting there with his mom, sharing a meal and laughing over silly jokes, he realized something important. Some days would be tough, but as long as he stayed true to himself and kept learning, he'd be okay. And deep down, he knew she'd always be there to guide him through it all. A few days passed and life seemed to return to normal. The boy went back to school, played with his friends, and helped his mom around the house like he always did. But every now and then, he'd think about what happened at the bank, the tellers, laugh, the way people had looked at him, and most importantly, how his mom had stepped in and handled everything with grace and strength. It wasn't something he could easily forget. One evening, as they sat together on the couch watching TV, the doorbell rang. His mom got up to answer it, and when she came back, she was holding a small envelope. She opened it carefully, pulled out a handwritten letter, and began reading silently. The boy watched her curiously, noticing the slight shift in her expression. Her eyebrows raised slightly and the corner of her mouth twitched into a faint smile. What's that? He asked, leaning forward. It's from the teller. His mom replied, handing him the letter. She wrote me an apology. The boy took the letter hesitantly, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He unfolded it slowly and read the words aloud, stumbling over some of the bigger phrases, but getting the gist of it. The teller started by saying how sorry she was for laughing at him and doubting his words. She admitted she hadn't meant to hurt anyone's feelings, but realized too late that her actions were disrespectful. She ended the letter by promising to be more mindful in the future and thanking his mom for giving her the chance to learn from her mistake. When he finished reading, he looked up at his mom. Do you believe her? His mom thought for a moment, tapping the letter against her palm. I think so, she said finally. Apologies don't mean much unless they're backed by action, though. Words are easy. It's what comes after that really counts. The boy nodded, still unsure. What happens now? Well, his mom explained, leaning back against the couch. She won't lose her job, but she'll have to go through some training to help her understand why what she did was wrong. And she'll work closely with a mentor, a senior employee who can guide her and make sure she's growing as a person and a professional. Does that happen a lot? The boy asked. People messing up and having to fix it? His mom chuckled, softly nodding. More than you'd think. Everyone makes mistakes, it's part of being human. What matters is whether we own up to them and try to do better. Some people never learn, but others use those moments to grow. I'm hoping she falls into the second category. The boy thought about that for a while, imagining what it must feel like to be the teller. He remembered the panic on her face when his mom introduced herself, the way her hands trembled slightly as she fumbled for an apology. Maybe she hadn't intended to hurt anyone. Maybe she'd just been caught off guard. Either way, it sounded like she wanted to change, and that gave him a small sense of satisfaction. Later that week, the boy noticed a difference in the way people treated him, not just at the bank, but everywhere. When he walked into stores or restaurants with his mom, employees greeted them warmly, almost reverently. At first, he found it strange. He was used to blending into the background, not standing out, but his mom reminded him that respect wasn't just about titles or positions. It was about treating everyone fairly, no matter who they were. "You know," she told him one afternoon as they strolled through the grocery store, "people see me and assume I expect special treatment because of my job, but that's not what leadership is about. It's about making sure everyone feels valued, not just the ones who look or act a certain way." The boy nodded, even though he didn't fully understand. He'd seen firsthand how easy it was for people to judge based on appearances, and he knew it wasn't fair. Still, he liked the idea of treating everyone equally, regardless of their age, race, or background. It felt like the right thing to do. As weeks turned into months, the incident at the bank became less of a sore spot, and more of a story he occasionally shared with close friends. One day, during recess at school, he found himself sitting on the swings next to his best friend. They were talking about random things, video games, homework, their favorite snacks, when the conversation shifted unexpectedly. "Hey," his friend said suddenly, "what's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you?" The boy paused, thinking hard. He'd never considered the bank incident scary before, but looking back, it had definitely shaken him. "Well," he began, swinging gently, "there was this one time when I went to the bank with my mom." He recounted the story bit by bit, starting with the teller's laughter and ending with his mom stepping in to set things straight. His friend listened intently, wide-eyed, occasionally interrupting to ask questions. By the time he finished, his friend was grinning ear to ear. "Wow," his friend said, shaking his head. "That's wild. Your mom sounds awesome." "She is," the boy agreed, smiling proudly. "She's the best." But as they continued talking, he realized something else. Sharing the story made him feel stronger, not weaker. Instead of dwelling on the embarrassment or frustration, he focused on the lessons he'd learned. The importance of standing your ground, staying true to yourself, and believing in the truth, even when others doubted you. Back home, the boy began noticing subtle changes in himself. He spoke up more in class, raising his hand confidently instead of waiting for someone else to answer. He stood taller when walking down the street, no longer shrinking under the weight of other people's stares. And whenever he faced a challenge, whether it was solving a tough math problem or dealing with a bully on the playground, he reminded himself of that day at the bank. If he could handle that, he could handle anything. His mom noticed the changes, too. One evening, as they sat together doing homework at the kitchen table, she glanced up and smiled. "You've grown so much lately," she said, her voice filled with pride. "I'm really proud of you." "Thanks," he replied, blushing slightly. "I guess I learned a lot from what happened." "You sure did," she agreed. "And you'll keep learning little by little every single day. That's how life works." The boy nodded, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges came his way, he'd face them head on, with courage, resilience, and the unwavering support of his mom by his side. Months passed, and the memory of the bank incident began to fade into the background of the boy's life. Schoolwork, soccer practice, and weekend trips with his mom filled his days, keeping him busy and distracted. But every now and then, something would remind him of that day. The way someone laughed at a joke he didn't find funny, or the dismissive tone a store clerk used when talking to a younger customer. Each time it happened, he felt a pang of recognition, but instead of letting it bother him, he reminded himself of the lessons he'd learned. One Saturday morning, the boy woke up early, excited for the day ahead. His mom had promised they'd visit her office again. It was Bring Your Kid to Work Day. and she thought it would be a good opportunity for him to see what she did on a daily basis. He didn't fully understand what being the owner of a bank branch entailed, but he loved spending time with her, watching how she interacted with people and solved problems. To him, she wasn't just his mom. She was a superhero in heels. When they arrived at the bank, the atmosphere was different from the last time. Employees greeted them warmly, some even stopping to chat with the boy. They asked about school, complimented his sneakers, and joked about how tall he was getting. It was clear they respected his mom, not because of her title, but because of who she was as a person. The boy soaked it all in, feeling a quiet sense of pride. As the day went on, his mom showed him around the office, explaining how things worked. She introduced him to the manager, who gave him a tour of the vault, a highlight of the visit. The heavy metal door creaked open, revealing rows of safety deposit boxes and stacks of cash bundled neatly in plastic wraps. The boy stared wide-eyed, marveling at the sight. For a moment, he forgot about everything else and let himself imagine what it might be like to work there someday. Later, while his mom attended a meeting, he wandered over to the teller counters where he'd stood months earlier. This time, though, no one laughed at him or doubted his words. Instead, the tellers smiled and waved, calling him by name. One of them even handed him a lollipop, which he accepted shyly, as he unwrapped it and popped it into his mouth. He couldn't help but notice the young blonde woman sitting at the far end of the counter, the same teller from before. She looked up and caught his eye, hesitating for a second before offering a small smile. "Hey," she said softly, her voice tinged with nervousness. "How are you?" The boy shrugged, unsure of how to respond. Part of him still felt a flicker of resentment, but another part remembered what his mom had said. Everyone makes mistakes. He decided to take the high road. "I'm good," he replied simply, holding her gaze. "I'm really glad you're here today," she continued, glancing down briefly before looking back up. "I wanted to say, I've been working on being better. At listening, I mean, and not making assumptions." He nodded slowly, chewing on the lollipop thoughtfully. "That's cool," he said after a pause. "I hope it works out." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, as if a weight had been lifted. "Thanks," she murmured, giving him a genuine smile this time. "You're pretty cool, you know that?" For the first time since meeting her, the boy genuinely smiled back. Maybe she wasn't so bad after all. Back home that evening, the boy sat cross-legged on the living room floor, flipping through a comic book while his mom cooked dinner. The smell of garlic and onions wafted through the air, making his stomach growl. He glanced up at her occasionally, noticing the way she moved effortlessly between tasks, humming along to the radio playing softly in the background. "You know," he said suddenly, closing the comic book, "I think I get it now." "Get what?" she asked, turning to look at him. "What you meant about people learning from their mistakes, like the teller today. She seemed different. Nicer." His mom smiled, leaning against the counter. "That's great to hear," she said. "Change takes time, but it's always worth it when someone puts in the effort." "Do you think she'll keep doing better?" he asked, tilting his head curiously. "I hope so," she replied honestly. "But either way, you handled yourself well today. That's what matters most." The boy grinned, feeling a swell of pride. He realized that forgiving someone wasn't about forgetting what they'd done. It was about acknowledging their effort to improve. It was a lesson he knew he'd carry with him for the rest of his life. As the weeks turned into years, the boy grew older, wiser, and more confident. He became the kind of person who stood up for others, whether it was sticking up for a classmate being teased or helping a stranger pick up dropped groceries. He carried those moments from the bank with him, not as scars, but as reminders of the strength he found within himself. One day, during a family gathering, an uncle asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. Without hesitation, the boy grinned and said, "A leader, like my mom." The room erupted in laughter and applause, but the boy's mom simply smiled, pulling him into a hug. "You already are," she whispered in his ear. And for the first time, he truly believed it. Years flew by, and the boy grew into a young man. Life had its ups and downs, school challenges, friendship dramas, and moments of self-doubt. But through it all, he carried the lessons from that day at the bank like a compass guiding him forward. The incident wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a story he often revisited in his mind, especially during tough times. It reminded him of who he was and what he stood for. By the time he reached his early 20s, he'd become someone others looked up to. He wasn't loud or flashy, in fact, he was quite the opposite. He listened more than he spoke, observed carefully before jumping to conclusions, and treated everyone with kindness, whether they were a CEO or a cashier at the grocery store. People noticed. They trusted him, respected him, and leaned on him when they needed advice. And while he didn't realize it at first, those qualities made him a natural leader. One summer afternoon, he found himself sitting in a cafe with a group of friends. They were laughing and joking around, enjoying the rare break from their busy schedules. At one point, the conversation shifted to childhood stories. Someone brought up an embarrassing moment from middle school, which led to another friend sharing a funny family tale. Eventually, the group turned to him. "Come on," one of his friends teased, nudging him playfully. "You've been quiet this whole time. Spill it. What's your most unforgettable story?" The young man hesitated for a moment, sipping his coffee as he thought about how much to share. Then, with a small smile, he began recounting the bank incident, the teller's laugh, the sting of disbelief, and the way his mom had stepped in to set things straight. As he spoke, his friends leaned in closer, hanging on to every word. "No way," one of them exclaimed when he finished. "That's incredible. Your mom sounds amazing." "She is," he replied, his voice soft but filled with admiration. "She taught me so much that day, not just about standing up for myself, but about empathy, patience, and forgiveness." Another friend nodded thoughtfully. "It's crazy how something like that can shape you, huh? Like, it's not even about the bank or the teller anymore. It's about the lessons you took away." "Exactly," he agreed, feeling a sense of clarity wash over him. It's easy to hold on to anger or resentment, but letting go, giving people a chance to grow, that's where real strength comes from. As the years went on, the young man pursued a career in business. He worked hard, climbed the ranks, and eventually started his own company, a tech startup focused on creating opportunities for underrepresented communities. It wasn't always easy. There were days when funding fell through, clients backed out last minute, or employees clashed over decisions. But no matter how stressful things got, he never lost sight of the values his mom had instilled in him: fairness, integrity, and compassion. One evening, after a particularly grueling week, he sat in his office, staring out the window. The city. Lights twinkled below, cars honking faintly in the distance. His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a text from his mom. "How's my favorite entrepreneur doing?" it read, followed by a heart emoji. He smiled, typing back quickly. "Tired, but alive. Thinking about you tonight." Her response came almost instantly. "Thinking about you too. Remember when you were little and we used to talk about dreams? You're living yours now." His chest tightened with emotion. She was right. He was living his dream, but none of it would have been possible without her guidance and love. Picking up the phone, he called her instead of texting back. When she answered, her familiar voice brought an instant wave of comfort. "I miss you," he said simply, leaning back in his chair. "I miss you too," she replied warmly. "But I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished. You've grown into such a remarkable person." They talked for a while longer, catching up on life updates and sharing laughs. Before hanging up, he thanked her for believing in him, for teaching him resilience, and for showing him what true leadership looked like. Fast forward a few years, and the young man found himself standing behind a podium, addressing a room full of people at a conference. He'd been invited to speak about entrepreneurship and leadership, and though he felt nervous, he also felt ready. As he scanned the crowd, he spotted his mom sitting near the front, beaming with pride. Her presence gave him courage. "When I was a kid," he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. I learned a lesson that has stayed with me ever since. It wasn't in a classroom or from a textbook, it happened in a bank of all places. The audience chuckled softly, intrigued. He went on to share the story, keeping it lighthearted but meaningful. By the time he finished, the room erupted in applause. People lined up afterward to shake his hand, thanking him for his honesty and insight. But the best part came later, when he and his mom walked out together. She looped her arm through his, squeezing gently. "You did great," she said, her eyes shining. "Your dad would have been so proud." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. His dad had passed away when he was young, but he often wondered what kind of man he would have grown into with both parents by his side. Still, he knew one thing for certain. His mom had done an incredible job raising him alone. Looking back on his life, the young man realized something profound. That day at the bank hadn't just been about proving a point or standing up for himself. It had been the beginning of a journey toward understanding the power of truth, the importance of resilience, and the beauty of second chances. And, as he continued down his path, inspiring others along the way, he carried those lessons with him, passing them on to anyone willing to listen. Because sometimes, the smallest moments leave the biggest impact, and the truth really does set you free.